Compliance, as it's done today, for the most part, on most projects, is horrendous. It feels like it's in the dark ages. We have billions of dollars in revenue a year. We are the gatekeepers to thousands upon thousands upon thousands of economic opportunities every day.
If I got $1 for everyone, someone told me oh no, I know all of the trade contractors in my space, I would be a billionaire by now.
There is this sometimes logical, sometimes illogical sense that because I'm familiar with you, you are superior.
What's the one thing nobody in construction is saying out loud about compliance?
We need the receipts. I've always been interested in data, and I hate the word compliance because compliance is like a minimum standard. And really, we should be pursuing leadership.
Hey everyone, hope you are doing great. Thanks for listening in to another episode of Build Different. Today, I'm speaking with a friend of mine and the Director of Economic Inclusion at Gilbane, John. John, thanks for chatting with me today.
Very excited to be here.
All right, so we're gonna dive into it, but first we wanna get some background on you, John. Can you give us a little bit on your background, how you got to where you are today?
Sure thing. So thank you for inviting me on, Wissam. I've been doing this work for, I would say, just under 15 years. It's been called different things over those 15 years, but essentially what I do is I work for a very large construction management company called Gilbane Building Company. Been with Gilbane for about 8 years. Prior to that, I worked for New York City Economic Development Corporation for about that time as well. And essentially what I did at EDC, I worked for a program called Opportunity MWDBE, which was about, meeting equity goals on some of New York City's largest projects. We worked with all the big builders who were building on the city's behalf. My job was to make sure that they were meeting those equity goals. And so that was more of a regulatory role. And then starting in 2018, I joined Gilbane because I saw a lot of opportunity there to become an implementer. All those best practices that I had learned over the years that I had attempted to hold builders accountable to. Now I got to do those things that I thought builders should be doing. And so I worked very closely with the head of this department at Gilbane, who is Yvette Stevens, an amazing woman and leader. And essentially we wrote the playbook for how to do this work. And when I say this work, it's kind of funny because my friends, if you ask them, my family, my friends, they'll stumble over an answer of what I do because I stumble over that answer too. I just hesitate to call it the typical things like, supplier diversity or, anything with the word compliance in it, because it really undersells what this work is. And this work is really about social responsibility and social impact. So I see myself as, working in the realm of economic development, community development, and basically looking at the projects that we have and leaving the communities in which we build stronger through how we approach the building of our construction projects. And that's a big responsibility. It takes a lot of strategy and leadership. And so, a lot of people, when they think about supplier diversity or community engagement, the first thing they think about is outreach events or, compliance and paperwork, which I try to minimize that piece of my job and really focus on the strategy and leadership. And those things are important, but they often get lost in the larger context of, what you should be doing in this space. So if I had to sum it up, I would say I've been working in social impact and responsibility within the construction industry, which is a very special industry, as you know, to do this work in for the last about 14, 15 years.
Cool, great. Yeah, it's hard to put in words. I was at dinner with some family friends yesterday, and they asked my dad, what does your son do? And he was like, I have no clue what his job is. I know he does something with technology and compliance, but I have no idea what that means. So for someone who's outside of compliance and construction, how would you put it into words on what is the goal that we're trying to do in the space that we live in?
So I think what draws me to this work, right, is I grew up in Rockaway Beach, which is in the 80s and 90s. It's in Queens. I love Rockaway. But, front and center was this idea that race and class were just inextricably linked. And it was very odd, to be on one block and then the next had public housing and the just totally different landscape, right? In a very small area. And so I was always curious about why that existed. And, you know, after I went into finance after college, studying economics for a little while, and I realized I wanted to do something that wasn't just challenging, but also made me feel like I was making a difference. And so focusing on like market-based solutions to racial inequity, racial disparity, gender disparity, this idea of a utopia where meritocracy really is what, what we're living in is what drew me to this work. I would say, how do you describe what we do to someone who, it's like I said in my first answer, I think it's just very difficult. It's basically like us as builders, right? We have billions of dollars in revenue a year, right? We are the gatekeepers to thousands upon thousands of economic opportunities every day. And because, our standards, who we hire, how we influence the thousands of trade contractors that we hire across the country, those are all things that can shape the industry, right, for the better. And so I would say that my job is to make sure we're living up to that responsibility and that it's really strategy. My job is in strategy. It's in strategy. There are a few industries as front and center on people's minds and, than construction. Everybody sees it. It's in your face. It's disruptive, but it's also can result in some things that are really beautiful. And how do we make sure that our approach to construction really is changing our communities and our society for the better?
Thank you for that, John. I guess you mentioned trade contractors and finding folks based on meritocracy, and I know that that's like a large part of what we do is how do we find the right qualified subs to do the work. But from your standpoint, what do you find more challenging? Is it like to find the right trade partners, or is it after finding them and they're on the project, making sure they succeed? Both are very important. What do you think is more challenging?
I think the first part is more challenging because there are so many reasons why that first part, sourcing, finding the contractors is difficult. One is there's like just a lot of cynicism in this space, right? People automatically think that they know that for even if you're a builder, you've been in the same market for 30 years, things have been done largely the same way for those 30 years. So there's just this, unchecked innate sense that the contracting market. And this idea that there could be contractors out there that you don't know who may be diverse or small or woman owned, because this is a relationship business, you tend to work with the same people often and the people that run in those same circles. And so, you know, there's always a lot of surprise that, there are other firms that exist that may not have access. And that's why you don't know them. And so it's really part of my job is to challenge the status quo in a smart way, right? Like, because this is actually really good for the industry, right? When we give, you know, outside of the normal cast of characters, when we give others the opportunity, we build essentially, if we do that across the board, we are investing and growing firms that could then compete at larger, and larger scopes. And we're, driving down construction costs. So, but the thing is the inertia of, thinking that the list, or even frankly, the desire to just, these two things, I think, really undercut any sort of will or energy to find other contractors. It's that not believing that they're out there, and also not wanting to work with anybody else who you're not familiar with, right? Like, construction is a risky industry, and there is this sometimes there sometimes logical, sometimes illogical sense that like because I'm familiar with you, you are superior. And you know, that goes, I would say, even for firms that have not performed well on our projects. So you know that there's a little bit of, distortion going on there. And so I think that those two things, our job, people who do my work, our job is to open access, right? Like, that doesn't mean lower the quality of what we're looking for or, lower eligibility, lower our standards. So once you get the firms to be out there, if you find the firms that are out there, getting them to the table. And sometimes, frankly, we have these requirements that may be overly and unduly excessive. And, there's this thinking that what we do for one, we do for all, like that somehow that is the basis of fairness. I would say in this approach, it's not, right? It's like if you're requiring the same insurance levels from a contractor who is doing carpentry for a package that's $300,000, as you are from the foundation guy for a 40 million, like that's just you're you're cutting out small businesses unnecessarily. You're also cutting out the opportunity to grow other firms in carpentry, and you're reducing competition, right? So you are driving up costs.
And then you come back and say, well, I couldn't find any, small business carpenters. Well, no wonder, because you put $100 million insurance limit on it, right? It's kind of like you're shooting yourself in the foot by creating these requirements. But it does, I mean, if I go back to one thing you were just saying, if I like got $1 for everyone, someone told me like, oh no, I know all of the trade contractors in my space, I would be a billionaire by now. Because like this comes up on almost every sales call that we do here at Tough Leaf, when we're talking to primes. They're like, oh no, I've been working in this in Miami for 20 years, so I know everyone. I'm like, there is no way you can know everyone. There's thousands of people there, especially when you go to small businesses. Like, it's just not possible. But they don't want to hear it.
I've had times where I'm like, oh, okay, there's no way this guy can be wrong. Like the conviction, I think they really do think that. A lot of them really do think that. And, I would say that most of the time they're genuinely surprised and almost curious, like when we find that that's not the case, right? So, a lot of this is, I'm not a construction expert, right? So a lot of this is I need my partners on the construction operations side, and so it's really about figuring out how to work together, leveraging their knowledge and really like thinking critically about he may not know all the resources that are available to us to help find these firms. And so like, marrying those two things together, really helps drive impact in this area.
Yeah, one thing I started doing is I open up our database, because we have every small minority woman business out there by getting the data from all these different sources we get them from. And then I'm like, okay, let's pick a trade. And they're like, okay, concrete. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna search for concrete in your area. I'm gonna start scrolling down. How many you think you know? They'd be like, oh, I know like 25, 30 people. I'm like, well, there's 240. Do you know all these names? And then they'd be surprised, like, oh, I've never heard of this company. I've never heard of this company. There's no way they do work in Miami. I'm like, okay, let's go to their profile. So they've done work for, JP Morgan Chase the building. How did you not know them? And then they're like, I see the look on their face. Well, like, oh, maybe I do not know everyone in my area, even though I've been working there for 30 years. And then another very interesting point you mentioned, and I think you brought it up on a panel we were both on before, of like they'd rather work with a contract trade partner that they know is like below average, just because they know them, right? Like the devil that you know, right? And then we're like, well, we want to try to make better options available. And to your point, competition is what drives prices down. Like everyone, you know, wins if there's competition. That's why like monopolies are not allowed in this country. So all great points.
It's competition, but it's also coverage too, right? Like competition is great But when we give another contractor an opportunity, we don't give when they win that opportunity. I want to be very deliberate about the words that I use here. We are creating another contractor that may provide a bid to us on another project where maybe we wouldn't have had any bids otherwise. Like the construction, we need so many more people and firms in construction. And, we're doing large, mega projects in certain places. And if other construction projects, should start, they're going to have a hard time getting anybody, right? So this competition and bringing more firms to the table, that doesn't mean necessarily having a higher number of bidders for each package, which we can talk about at a different time. But is building that overall pipeline and capacity to build in a market, period, right? So there are lots of benefits to it.
Yeah, especially now with all like new types of construction coming up with like the data center boom, right? There's billions of dollars there, and there the complaint is always like we don't have enough trade partners, we don't have enough people, we don't have enough companies to fulfill the demand. So like you're not gonna be able to create more companies if you just keep working with the same companies. That means that like why would anyone start a company, right? And then that's I guess one of the biggest things that we're trying to do here is supply extra companies so that we can meet the growing demand of the construction industry in total. But that's pretty cool. I'm gonna take us back a little bit to like compliance and because you mentioned I think in the at the beginning that there's a lot of things that are manual work that compliance teams need to do, things like good faith effort documentation type work and so on, and things that feel more like manual pushing paper instead of like doing real strategy work, right? To your point is like what you do is strategy. What do you think is like, what does that cost us as society or as a construction company or as a project? And who's actually absorbing the costs right now, right? Because people still need to do that stuff.
This is a good question. It gets to the heart of something I'm passionate about. Compliance, as it's done today, for the most part, on most projects, is horrendous. Like in just it feels like it's in the dark ages. Especially now with the capabilities of AI, it really is putting in perspective just how outdated what we do on the compliance side is. Like there are so many issues with taking someone's time who's doing the work that I'm doing and bogging them down you know, in paper, essentially. I think that compliance, there's so many, it's a no-brainer that it needs to be as automated as possible, because there's just no bad side to it, right? Like you trust the data more. It enables you it enables you to see what's going on in real time and thus make decisions that could have impact and change the course of the project. And it allows you to step back and not get, I don't want anybody to have to like enter dollars into it, like all day. Like it allows us to spend more time on strategy, looking at the big picture. And frankly, I find that much more gratifying.
Definitely, definitely. I think all industries are trending that way, especially with AI. But to your point, it seems like here we've been like kind of stuck in the dark ages where technology has moved forward. We haven't moved forward as fast as we should have. But hey, maybe we take two steps forward now with everything that's happening, all the developments with AI. So if a perfect technology did exist, if you can imagine it, and then it exists today, what does it do, or like what are the different things that it does?
So when we did that panel, it was like, it's crazy how like, sometimes you just kind of come to accept like this is just the way things are. And it wasn't until I have been having conversations with you that I'm like, wait, it could be better. Like this could be better. And frankly, like improving this, right, I think solves a huge perception problem for our work, right? Because first of all, it's data. We could do more data-driven strategies and analysis. It elevates our work. I really think it does. So the fact that our compliance systems are just really like, you know, inept, it does the opposite. And so I would say, since you got me thinking bigger, And this goes for any, no, you know, compliance tracking software that I'm talking about in particular. It's all that I've been exposed to, right? So improvement wise, I think that, it's really important to be able to capture the commitments that each prime contractor has made. As the CM, we're tracking how we're doing on a project overall, but in the solicitation process, in the bidding process and award process, we're negotiating with our prime contractors to make sure that they're also embodying our commitment to small and local businesses, right? And so if you don't do it at that stage, you're less likely to get any kind of alignment from them later on once they've already been awarded and don't really have any incentive to do things any differently than they would have had you had the conversation with them at the right time. So I would say real like tracking of the contractor's commitments and making sure that those commitments promised during award before technical award, right, are followed through and become awards, right? And that those awards become eventually payments for services rendered. Things happen on a construction project. There are change orders is, just sometimes can comprise like such a huge percentage of the project, right? Things are going to change. We know that. However, because of that, and because things change so fast, it's very important to be able to say, hold up, this was the commitment, this was the award, and payments are down here. They're 50% done with their work. The percentage done with work is also something that should be clear because you want to be looking at how they're performing in the context of where they are in their contract, right? So these things should not be things that you have to search for and do calculations. They should be the top line sort of metrics, and it should be easy to see at the contractor level, what's going awry. I would say some other things that, if there are issues with any particular, so the system should be multi-directional. So like most of the systems, right? So the subs on the project should be have the opportunity to register information directly to the CM because, you know, one of the drawbacks of, you know, it's not a drawback necessarily, it's just reality of a work site is that we don't have direct relationships as Gilbane with all the contractors on our site and including and often those small and local contractors right there, they're reporting to a prime on our project.
And they're second tier to you, right? So like there's no direct relationship a lot of times. Yeah.
Right. So, but at the same time, we don't have the bandwidth to manage all of them. But if there is an issue, we want them to have a line to us so that and it would be great if that compliance system could give them the opportunity to do that and raise any red flags. I think even our primes, like if the system could also give primes the ability to easily let us know, hey, we were going to work with this sub and this sub, just an easy like system for managing those communications that happen that's seamless and makes it easy to manage the flow of information rather than having to work through email. That would be a huge benefit. I could go on all day.
I would love it. I'm taking notes. But I think to do what I heard is one is really focusing on having access to the data, right? And instead of like the data process being manual and what I call busy work that doesn't really drive the needle, make it be automated, right? We have the right technologies to automate all of that data collection, data entry stuff. Like we don't need to be spending hours and hours doing it, right? And that way we're spending time driving impact as opposed to doing the busy work. And that's, a tough leaf internally with all of our leadership team. I've been asking them like, what is busy work that you guys can automate? Even outside of like the entire compliance space is like, you probably spend hours just doing things that could be automated. How do we do that? So that's one thing. And the second thing, and I also definitely agree with that is huge, is communication, right? Is like how do I raise my hand and say, hey, I have an issue? because there's no lines of communication and making that in the software. And I guess from the other side, how can you, as a person managing all of this, identify the issue proactively, not reactively in 4 months when like, hey, guess what? The construction is done. There's nothing we can do now.
Right. Real time.
Real time stuff. All of that is great. That's why I always enjoy and love spending this time talking to you because there's a lot of insight there, especially for us as a company trying to make this streamlined and easy. I guess last question. I wish we can talk all day, but you're busy, and I'm sure our listeners, would love to hear more, but unfortunately, they're gonna have to wait. What's the one thing like nobody in construction is saying out loud about compliance? Like, what's the conversation that needs to be had, but people kind of like are keeping it down the under the rug?
About compliance particularly.
Yeah, and in the compliance in the attraction space, inclusion, and that kind of stuff.
I honestly think it like kind of goes back to a previous answer. Like I just think there's a lot of cynicism. I think that this work, almost like a professional requirement for me and people doing this work to have, a positive mindset. The cynicism can really kill you in this space. And if nobody believes that anything real of value can happen through this work, then, it's going to continue to be approached as a checkbox. And, when you're approaching things as a checkbox, by definition, you're not really approaching it with critical thinking or thinking about strategies that really would move the needle. Like you're just, I think I hate the word compliance because it's the word that's most used. I think compliance is like a minimum standard, right? Like, and really we should be, you know, pursuing leadership. I think that if people really were in touch with what this actually does or could do, if it was applied with rigor and earnestness for the community, obviously the big picture stuff, like I talked about society and the need for competition and whatever. I think the narrative often goes the other way, which, people think that this is there's a lot of like, just like opposite day stuff here. It's like people think this is about the opposite of fairness. And that's because execution is sometimes poor and there are some bad actors who root it for everybody. Right. And, like the cynicism that people think of, like, for example, pass-throughs, like this idea that I'm going to hire a business who's not going to do any of the work, but they're going to sub it all out. Like that is a result of cynicism. Someone who's believed, I mean, if they have integrity, I mean, to me, that's lack of integrity. But there are certified businesses who will do that, right? Because they may not feel that they're going to get real opportunities, right? And so I think this, you know, I don't think that, good faith efforts, which is what people, firms are beholden to, has become synonymous with like, just lacks enforcement. So I think that focusing on the good, the positive, I think it's a good time to be doing that. I think what this year has taught people in my role is that, first of all, we need the receipts, right? I've always been interested in data and I hate when people think this is touchy-feely stuff. I mean, it is, frankly. Like I care about my work because I want to help people, but it's strategy and it's leadership and it's a lot of analysis. And so, really, one thing we do at Gilbane is I try to like really introduce a lot of with data collection and management. And so, if a compliance software, can help with sort of, you know, generating reliable metrics that really tell the whole story. And, one of the things is we look at a participation rate, right? Like one metric. And we should be tracking a basket of metrics in the industry that really speak to the full picture of our social impact, right? In the supplier diversity space. And there are plenty of them, right? So a compliance system that's reliable with the data, not just on the project level, but for a CM at the portfolio level, what are we doing as an enterprise, as a business, is another, example of a characteristic, that a feature. if you will, that would be good for a compliance system to have. But I just think that cynicism, this disconnection to the positive impact this work could have if earnestly applied, it saps people's energy. It doesn't, it removes any vigor and, is self-fulfilling. So I think it behooves us to not only have the data and the receipts and be tracking that data closely, it also behooves us to be telling the success stories. And I have been guilty of just focusing on numbers in this role because I feel like too many firms focus on an anecdote or a story and they don't speak to the data, which I think is disingenuous. And so I've naturally just gone the other way in my focus. I think we at Gilbane, we realize that while we need to continue and double down on that data collection and even expand the basket of metrics that we're looking at, we do need to tell that human story because that is what people remember. And so we need both of those things because the human story without the data, really, it makes it unclear if the builder is really committed to this work, because you did one thing on a project, like show me that this is representative of what you actually do through data and participation rates across projects. So I think telling the success stories and reviving passion in this work, I think it's the right time for it. And I think that we really need to figure out how to do that. And I think focusing on the impact that it could have, showing that impact, and then yelling that impact through a megaphone, I think is what we need to do.
I love this because you really answered three questions in one, right? What is the problem? Is the cynicism? Why does it exist? Because of lack of data, lack of visibility. People are just trying to check boxes. People not believing in this. And the third question you answer is how do we solve it? By having the data, highlighting the success stories at the same time, tracking the impact, the success metrics, and doing that through a compliance platform that can handle all of this, take away the busy work and help us focus on the strategy. So I really love this answer. And it's the perfect way to end this episode. Thank you again, John, for being with us here today. I really appreciate your time and everything that you've been doing for the industry in general. 15 years is a very long time to dedicate to this. And I know, and I've heard from a lot of trade vendors and subcontractors in New York that, their lives have been changed because they've met you and, their whole company trajectory has changed. So thanks again for everything that you do. Before we wrap up, if people want to follow your work and what you're doing or get in touch with you, is there a best place for them to go? What do you recommend them doing to get there?
I'm on LinkedIn, so follow me on LinkedIn, reach out on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect with people who have a curiosity about this work. I'm also wrapping up a guide called Intentional Building that Gilbane is developing for basically our approach to this work and our approach to workforce, which we didn't talk about today because that wasn't the focus, but workforce is obviously another animal, and compliance is big with that as well. So intentional building, if you're interested in learning more about intentional building, reach out to me.
Sounds great. Well, thanks again, John. I really appreciate your time, and we'll be in touch. Take care.
Thank you so much.